In this video, we will be continuing our topic of how strong is the Pipeworks trilogy Godzilla, specifically from the game Godzilla Unleashed, released in 2007. Specifically in this video, I will be covering the three distinct versions of the game, that being the PlayStation 2 version, the Wii version, and the Nintendo DS version called Double Smash. The first thing we'll cover is the general story mode of this game, which has gotten quite a lot more development put into it compared to the past two games. Taking place sometime after the events of Save the Earth, some strange crystals suddenly appear in orbit and crash into the Earth, knocking the systems keeping the monsters at Monster Island locked away, unleashing them upon the world, as well as crashing into numerous cities all around the world that cause several different environmental phenomena, such as causing massive flooding in Tokyo, turning Seattle into a giant lava volcano, turning Sydney, Australia into basically Antarctica, to turning Osaka into a heavily irradiated zone, and causing a massive anti-gravity vortex that just lifted the entire city of London up into the stratosphere. These crystals are spreading all over the planet. Some specialized crystals, which give off distinct colorized glow, have even shown to be able to corrupt monsters that go near them, giving them a powered up state, but also driving them mad without. And what's disturbing is that this extends to robotic mechanical monsters as well, though the crystal influence on them can be destroyed if the crystals in question in the area are destroyed as well, or if the monster corrupted is beaten down by another monster, then they can take the power for themselves. There are 7 distinct crystal surges, each with unique abilities. Another thing that helps this game stand out from its previous entries is the whole faction mechanic. All the playable monsters in this game are divided up into 4 factions: the Earth Defenders, the Global Defense Force, the Vortac Aliens, and the Mutants. The Earth Defenders is basically the Godzilla faction, or extremist Captain Planet, where they care about the Earth, they'll fight against anything that tries to corrupt or destroy it, so definitely the crystals and the Vortac Aliens. But they don't care as much if the humans get caught in the crossfire. The Global Defense Force is of course the pro-human faction and prefers to keep collateral damage to a minimum, but otherwise a lot of times you could actually believe them teaming up with the Earth Defenders. The aliens are of course interested in collecting the power of the crystals for themselves, as well as causing as much damage to the humans as possible. And the mutants are just the chaotic wildcards obsessed with causing as much destruction as possible, as well as taking the power surge crystals for themselves. Several distinct missions pop up in the game, mostly based around which monster you're playing as, but the ones that stand out in particular is the beginning one where you play as Godzilla, Rodan, or Anguirus, and you have to free the other 2 captive monsters on Monster Island before escaping the island yourself. The missions where you encounter the various monsters corrupted by the power surge crystals and either destroy the larger crystals in order to free them, or defeat them and take the power for yourself. There's also the mission in Sydney where you have to fight a giant crystal tower that will fire like miniature crystal meteorites at you and shoot lasers. Now why does that sound familiar? Then there's the mission where the Vortac aliens finally decide to actually bring their mothership into the atmosphere, launching an all-out invasion on San Francisco. Of all the places, they pick San Francisco? Really? There are 2 ways to really go about completing this mission, assuming you're not on the Vortex side. That's by either defeating the alien monster that's guarding the ship, or, and I think you can only do this in the Wii version, you can actually bring down the ship itself by shooting at these, I guess they're like stabilizers that are keeping the ship in air, and then you can have another fight on the mothership itself, and I think it's really the only time you can ever even fight on the mothership in the story mode. You can just do it to kick the Vortac while they're down, literally. What's interesting is that if you ignore this, most times it seems it'll always be brought down by Anguirus of all monsters, which is kind of funny considering how Anguirus is like the one monster I can't see being able to bring down the mothership because he doesn't really have any ranged attacks. The best he has is his roar, and that's not going to do anything, and I don't think you can throw buildings at the stabilizers either, or at least I haven't been able to pull it off. Then there's the Big Trouble mission in Seattle, where the Vortac have harnessed enough energy to basically turn King Ghidorah into a super-sized power-up version, and you have to team up with like 2 other monsters in order to bring it down. This powered-up state is referred to in-game as critical mass, but official online sources refer to it as the Tyrant form. We'll talk about this a little later. Then there's 2 missions, one of which is actually possible to skip, where you have a fight against the Atragon warship, a floating ship with a drill powered by the crystals, captained by a vet known as General Gyozan. It's established that he has a grudge against Godzilla, and right before the end of the game, regardless of which monster you're playing, unless you're a Global Defense Force, he will always try to attack you. It's pretty much one of the very few forced missions in the game, and once again prove that playing as Godzilla is the canonical choice for the story. Half of his attacks won't ever hit you unless you're standing still. He likes to kind of announce what he's about to do before he does it, and half of his attacks only go in a straight line anyway, so all you have to do is get to the side. Afterwards, one of two things can happen. If you're playing as either an Earth Defender, GDF, or Alien Monster, you will get the finale mission, where supposedly the three factions are supposed to set aside their differences and team up to take down the mutant threat once and for all, which is apparently secretly being led by Space Godzilla, who was apparently behind this whole crystal mess the whole time. Like, the whole crystal thing didn't make it obvious enough, as well as the fact that he's the only monster absent from the story this whole time. Even though when you pause the game, the description for the level says specifically you have to team up to take down Space Godzilla and his army. Army is kind of a strong word. In order to get Space Godzilla to show up, you just simply have to take out enough monsters. They don't even have to be the mutant monsters. You can take out, like, literally any of the other factions, and they'll show up, I think, when 3 of them go down. What's also interesting is that apparently Space Godzilla counts as his own faction, because even fellow mutant monsters will attack him as well, as shown here. That or the mutants don't really have any loyalty to begin with, but it is kind of funny to see Godzilla and Destroya teaming up to take down Space Godzilla. To be fair to Space Godzilla, he has changed his tactics a little bit since last time. Now when he takes enough damage, he'll try to float away to a different part of the area, where he'll then erupt quite a bit of crystal towers around himself, so you have to break them to get through to him. Meanwhile, he can just have them shoot at you with various energy attacks, which quickly drains your health. But the whole teaming up with the other factions to take down Space Godzilla doesn't really hold up, since they seem more interested in fighting each other than fighting specifically the mutants or Space Godzilla. Regardless, you can take down Space Godzilla easily all by yourself. In fact, I'd argue this game is probably for the most part easier than the first 2 games, simply because, at least to my knowledge, there is no hard mode difficulty in this game. Afterwards, assuming you were playing as either an Earth Defender or GDF Mega Monster, you'll get the good ending, where the human characters even thank you personally, which is nice. If you're playing as an alien monster, then you get the special Vortac ending where they win, which I always thought was a little underwhelming, especially if you decide to become a turncoat monster and actually ally with the GDF and Earth Defenders. You still get the alien ending by default. I could just imagine like a crazy WTF ending where like King Ghidorah of all monsters decides to rebel against his alien masters, and you just get a special version of the good ending where the professor guy says, "In a shocking turn of events, it was King Ghidorah that saved the day. I'll be perfectly honest, I did not see that one coming." Like, all they had to do is record like a little extra voice lines and it would have been awesome. It would have been a hilarious way to end it if you were playing as like one of the bad guy monsters and suddenly decide to turn good. Similarly, we could have gotten the same thing with the good monsters, where they just randomly decide to ally with the aliens for whatever strange reason. Like, Godzilla decides, hey, maybe the Vortac will be doing a better job taking care of the Earth than the humans were. But speaking of good monsters getting the bad endings, if you get all the power surge crystals as any of the other faction monsters, you will instead unlock the Tyrant ending, where instead of getting the finale, you get a little bonus extra mission that replaces the finale mission, where you actually have to fight against your former allies because you become so corrupted. It's just like, you're too evil now. This is probably the hardest mission in the entire game, because it's literally just a 1v3 fight. And no, the other monsters aren't going to fight each other, they're all focused on you. Though with the power of the power surge crystals, that might not be as difficult as one would think, if you know what you're doing, and that's another thing we're going to talk about later in the video. Afterwards, you get the final mission of, I guess, the bad ending, where you get the Tyrant mission, where you basically get to be the final boss yourself, and basically take down monsters from all the other factions. Again, they're supposed to team up against you, but they seem more interested in fighting each other than you, so it's easy pickings. And because you weren't overpowered enough, apparently the game decided to just give you the Tyrant form permanently throughout the whole level. Normally, it's a power-up state that's only supposed to last for 25 seconds, when you fill up a meter by your health bar. But nope, in the final level of the Tyrant route, the game just decided, just make it permanent. And then you basically get the mutant ending, where the crystals take over the whole planet. I guess you're the most powerful monster in the universe. What sucks for the mutants is, you get this ending regardless of what you do. You could literally play through and not even get any of the power surge crystals and still get this ending, which I thought was a little lazy. What's more curious is that Space Godzilla gets his own version of this ending, which is literally just the same as the mutant ending, except the one character just says, Space Godzilla has won, so just the mutants have won. Just like with the previous game, this game added quite a few new monsters, most notable being the Showa Mechagodzilla and Biolante, as well as 2 new original monsters, Obsidius and Chrysalis. Though sadly, most of these monsters would only be available in the Wii version of the game. What's curious is that the PS2 version has its own exclusive monster, Batra, who is basically just a cooler, but pretty much the same as Mothra, except for maybe as a larva form, which is quite a bit different with the ranged attack, I mean. Speaking of which, let's talk about other differences in the PS2 version. It is basically just Godzilla Save the Earth, but with the maps from Godzilla Unleashed put in. Graphics are pretty much the same, the controls are pretty much the same, but what makes this lame is that you don't even get the whole Tyrant form when you fill up the critical mass meter. Instead, I think you basically just go into the Rage mode from Save the Earth, except you don't even get to use your ultimate attack. It's just the damage buff, and that's it, I believe. Speaking of which, the combat in the Wii version changed up quite a bit for obvious reasons, motion controls and all. For example, with Godzilla, he still has some of his attacks from the previous 2 games, games, like his Haymaker attack and his Tail Slice, but he's got quite a few new different moves as well. What's also interesting is that now Godzilla can charge his energy meter. It doesn't refill automatically, you have to like manually charge it yourself, but you can do this while doing almost literally anything, like moving and I think even attacking as well. Another added thing is that Godzilla can now fire his atomic breath while moving. The monsters also now, instead of just having one health bar, now have multiple health bars. Though the bars themselves deplete a lot quicker now, but it's compensated by the fact that you have more than one health bar, with most monsters having 5 or some even having 6 health bars. Once a health bar is fully depleted and you're knocked into the next health bar, the original previous one cannot be replenished. The good news is only like the heavy damage dealing attacks will actually destroy the health bar. You can keep hitting a monster as much as you like, but unless you do like the strong heavy attacks, they're going to eventually heal back all the way. Which brings us to another topic. Health regen is a thing in this version, and your health regenerates, quite honestly, really fast, all things considered. Pretty much regenerating as soon as you stop taking damage, unless you're doing certain actions like charging your energy or doing grapple attacks. I'd say even though each health bar can be emptied out a lot faster, the regeneration, as well as the fact that you have several health bars, I think in the long run gives you more survivability than in the first 2 games. Another interesting fact, both Destroya and Kiryu are actually the only 2 monsters able to still use their rage attacks from the previous game. Now instead of being like a special rage attack you have to be in a special state to use, you just simply have to have your energy meter fully charged and you can unleash your rage attack from the previous game. Kiryu can still use his Absolute Zero Cannon, although it's a lot harder to use now because he likes to just aim at the ground, so you're better off just simply using it while you're in the air jumping. But that's also hard to aim because he'll often fire past his intended target, and you pretty much have to hit the monster spot on in order for it to actually count and do damage. But if you do manage to land it through some miracle, then not only will you take off an entire health bar, but also the monster hit will freeze afterwards. Similarly with Destroya, he can still use his Oxygen Destroyer attack where he shoots a big purple energy ball up into the sky, and then after a few seconds it comes crashing down and takes off an entire bar of health from whatever it hits. This is obviously a lot more easier to land. What's crazy about this move is that the game doesn't even tell you how to do it. The manual doesn't give you all the controls, all the abilities of every playable monster. There is a training mode that is supposed to do that, but it doesn't tell you how to do Destroya's Oxygen Destroyer ability, but it does tell you how to do Kiryu's Absolute Zero ability. Though to be honest, Destroya doesn't need that because apparently he can use his laser katana indefinitely in the Wii version. Yeah, if you hold down these 2 specific buttons, his laser katana will activate, and all you have to do is just swipe with the Wii remote. It doesn't take any energy at all, completely trivializing combat in this game and making Destroya easily the most broken monster in the game. Monsters also now have a sprinting mechanic, which, I'm sorry, just looks very bizarre seeing Godzilla sprint like this. Now that I think we've covered that general information, let's finally get into the new feats that have popped up in this game in particular. Seeing as how the missions take place in various cities all across the globe, your monster obviously has to get from one point to another within a certain period of time. Apparently a whole day passes after each mission you do, and the days normally drag out to maybe about 18 to maybe 20 days total by the end of the game. This is significant because you could be doing one mission that takes place in New York, and then the next mission go all the way to Cindy, and all this within a day. That means that theoretically your monster can travel almost 10,000 miles within 24 hours, which at the bare minimum would probably take about 414 miles per hour, which would be high subsonic travel speed. And that's just the bare minimum. Alright, I'm just assuming your monster just goes straight from one mission all the way to the next, but if they go somewhere to rest in between levels, then I could see the travel speed easily jumping up to being at least twice that amount at transonic plus. And while we're on that subject, regardless of how much damage your monster takes, they seem to recover all their health back quite quickly in between battles. You can literally engage in dozens of fights within the course of like 3 weeks, and still show no signs of fatigue even as far in as the last mission you do in each story round. This brings us now to the effects of each of the 7 different kinds of crystal surge abilities you can pick up in the game. The Fire Surge Crystal coats your monster in flames and will increase physical damage by 20%. In addition, each crystal surge, should you choose to basically deactivate them while they're active, which I'm assuming lasts for maybe at least 15 or 20 seconds, will also unleash a shockwave effect that will do massive damage to any monsters unfortunate enough to be close enough to you. Though in the Fire Surge Crystal's case, it has a unique discharge ability where instead your monster will fire out Beam of Fire. I'll admit to having not compared how strong it is compared to Godzilla's regular atomic breath, but it seems to do considerably fast damage to any health bar that gets hit by it. The Electric Surge allows you to charge your energy meter significantly faster, as well as coating your monster in electricity, as well as also apparently increasing the damage your beam attacks do. The Discharge effect sends out a massive shockwave that apparently paralyzes monsters, somewhat somewhat of an EMP effect. The Speed Surge increases movement and attack speed by roughly 50% based off what I've analyzed myself. It also apparently allows you to jump higher too. Its shockwave effect will also slow down any monsters that get hit by it for a short period of time. Crystal Surge gives the user crystal skin and reduces damage by 85% and also gives you a light blue tint. The Radiation Surge makes your monster green in color and increases regeneration by 20%, while also simultaneously slowing down nearby enemy monsters' regeneration, as well as apparently also charges up your energy significantly faster too, which kind of makes me question the point of the Electric Surge if they do the same thing, but this one better. The Shield Surge gives the monster metallic skin and also reduces damage, though I can't be certain by how much when compared to the Crystal Surge, though this one does have the drawback of slowing down your movement speed, but it does make you immune to crab damage. The Darkness Surge, in addition to generating a dark cloud around you, blocks all ranged attacks, including fire from the military. All 7 of these surges replenish in between missions, though sadly you can't choose which order to use each one in. You have to go in the order you collected them in, from newest to oldest. The shockwave effects alone are enough to quickly deplete the health of any monster unfortunate enough to be close to you when you do so. Though if you felt like dragging out the fight, you could exploit the various effects of each surge before quickly deactivating them with the shockwave effect before they wear off. Finally, this brings us to the critical mass or Tyrant form each of the monsters are capable of undergoing. There are 3 main crystals you may come across in the levels. The blue ones will replenish some health. The yellow ones will completely restore your energy meter, and you'll even see these lightish green ones. Destroying these will fill up a gauge next to your monster icon, and when the gauge is full, your monster will start to glow with cracks across their body and increase in size, strength. From what I've been able to tell, at least with Godzilla specifically, he seems to grow about 20 meters, because he definitely seems to be just a teeny bit taller than Destroyer, who's actually smaller than his movie counterpart at only 110 meters. In the Tyrant form, monsters do increase damage, which I've calculated to be about a 33% increase, but also take more damage as well, sort of turning them into a bit of a more glass cannon type. Contrary to this one random statement the Versus Wiki has linked, the monsters do not do triple damage just simply because of the Big Trouble mission where it took 3 monsters to take down King Ghidorah. Spoiler alert, you can do this fight all by yourself. What's also interesting is that King Ghidorah, specifically in this mission, is actually a lot taller than he'd normally be in his Tyrant form. He looks to be easily twice the size of any monster he goes up against, including Biolante, who by default is the tallest monster in the game, being at 130 meters, surpassing even her movie counterpart. The Tyrant form normally only lasts 25 seconds, but if you get the last level, the Tyrant route, you'll actually be in your Tyrant form for the entire mission, indicating that your monster has harnessed enough the crystal energy that has now become permanent. Oh, and did I forget to mention you can still use all 7 of the power surges you've collected as well? Using the Crystal Surge, you can fix the issue of taking more damage, and the Fire Surge will give you an additional 20% increase, getting it up to about a 1.53 damage increase overall. I always found it kind of weird that all of this came from Space Godzilla. Does this mean theoretically Space Godzilla has all these abilities as well? How do these unique crystals come to be, and how is Space Godzilla just accidentally granting all these other monsters powers that he doesn't have by himself? Moving on to the DS version of the game. While it is obviously a lot different in how it plays compared to the console version, with you selecting 2 monsters to control, one that flies in the top screen of the DS, the other tackles the ground on the bottom screen of the DS. When you first start the game, the only monsters unlocked by default is Godzilla and Mothra, so we're going to assume they're the canon heir or the story favorite. Officially, according to one of the developers, the feats shown in this game are canon adjacent to the console version, or at the very least it was confirmed that the events of Save the Earth happened in this version of the game's universe as well. Not to mention that it pretty much is the same title as the main Godzilla Unleashed, just has a little tag on for the DS version. It's basically a 2D side-scroller where you just fight armies of regular cannon fodder enemies, then you fight a mini-boss halfway through the levels, before fighting the big boss at the end of each level. And this game features some unique monsters that never really popped up in the console versions, such as Manda and some new unique Sphinx enemy. You can possibly gain some temporary power-ups from destroying some giant crystals partway through the levels, like temporary invincibility, and it seems at least the ground control monsters seem to have a special meter that slowly heals up over the course of the level, which allows you to unleash a super special attack. In Godzilla's case, he jumps up into the air and basically creates a bunch of nuclear cyclones that rain down on his enemies. Basically creates like a storm of radiation that ravages all beneath him. Sadly, you'll have to make do with this one screenshot, since regardless of all the footage I've looked at from other people, no one seemed to ever use this special ability in their footage. They seem to really like making Mecha King Ghidorah a giant in this game. Just like with the Godzilla Destroy All Monsters handheld version, Godzilla Domination. Is he like taller than Godzilla Earth here? I mean, Godzilla in this universe is supposed to be at 100 meters, so how tall is Mecha King Ghidorah? Just like in the console version, the final boss is of course Space Godzilla, and of course Godzilla and Mothra together win. The story in the handheld version is also quite a bit different from the console version, but the general premise is the same. Crystal strike the Earth, Space Godzilla is the cause, and the playable monster duo has to stop it. We get our biggest attack potency upgrade from the intro of the game, with Space Godzilla apparently appearing out of a white hole, which is very large in diameter. Also, I'm not entirely sure what this particular shot comes from. Maybe it's in the game over or what, I'm not sure, but apparently at some point, Space Godzilla basically blasted a giant chunk of the Earth away. The white hole beat was calculated to be large star level, and I'd say this is relevant to the console version because in the beginning, the human characters mentioned how the meteor shower containing the crystals that would rain down on the Earth just appeared out of nowhere and that they didn't pick it up on their satellite sensors. Sound a whole lot like they somehow emerged out of nothingness. The white hole would explain their sudden appearance. The Versus Wiki seems to incorrectly believe that the Vortex UFOs are moving faster than light based off how fast they move through space, and obviously they have to travel far to get from one point of the universe to another every time they decide to go and invade Earth. But again, I don't think that correlates to how fast they're moving when you can actually shoot them down in-game, especially because I honestly don't think they're moving much faster than the rockets or tank shells that the military from the human side fire out. And as I brought up before in previous videos, obviously something's going to be moving a lot slower in atmosphere than in space because of little things like air resistance, friction, and gravity. So yeah, I'd still maintain his combat and reaction speed to being supersonic to hypersonic based off his ability to dodge and react to tank shells firing, with his physical strength and durability scaling to Space Godzilla, who based off his massive white hole opening in the handheld version of Godzilla Unleashed is high large star level. The 20% strength increase granted by the Fire Crystal Surge combined with the 33% increase in strength with the Tyrant form gets him a little closer to that solar system level, but still falling quite a bit short. And hey, in the Tyrant ending, we get a version of Godzilla that joins the 120 meter club. One last thing before I wrap up this video, I want to scale all the monsters from weakest to strongest based off lore and gameplay, and in order to do that, we've got to take a look at the monsters entries in the Godzilla Unleashed manual, which will shed some light on the power scaling of some of these monsters. I'm not going to go over all the monsters' entries in the manual, but I will mention the ones that are the most notable and important for power scale. For example, Godzilla, literally the first sentence for his entry in the manual is that he's the most powerful of the Earth Defender faction. That automatically puts him above all the other monsters that are in the Earth Defender faction, including Baragon, which is curious because Baragon's got a higher attack stat than Godzilla. It also mentions that Godzilla has some sort of sixth sense, which allows him to always get to where he needs to be with enough time to spare. It also mentions that he sleeps beneath the ocean waves, which we can confirm based off the opening for Save the Earth. I also forgot to mention that in the Wii version of Unleashed, Godzilla's not restricted with how long he can fire his atomic breath so long as you have the energy for it. In the previous two games, you could only fire it for a few seconds, but if you have all 4 energy bars charged, you can just fire it from full all the way to empty. The quick-fire fireball attack also only takes up 1 energy bar, which means it's easier to spam it now, whereas in the previous two games, you could really only maybe fire it twice before fully depleting your energy meter. There's also the addition of Godzilla 90s and Godzilla 1954, both of which sadly are not playable in the story mode, only in the multiplayer modes of the game, further cementing that Godzilla 2000 is of course the canon version. But what's interesting is that this is not the case in the PS2 version, where you can actually play as Godzilla 90s in the main story, though once again you won't run into the Godzilla 2000, which further makes me question what is the relation between these two versions of Godzilla, and with the inclusion of 54, that just makes things more confusing. Biolate, who we actually see being created partway through the story mode, as shown in one of the cutscenes, is described as possibly being the most powerful monster on Earth if it weren't for her slow speed stat, which means her lack of speed is the only thing holding her back from surpassing monsters as powerful as, say, even Destroya, who is literally described as Death Incarnate, and capable of using his laser katana to slice through even the strongest monster flesh. That last sentence does make me think that he himself isn't the strongest monster, but is perfectly capable of engaging with said monster. Gigan is described as the vanguard of the alien invaders and their finest fighter. That doesn't necessarily mean he's the strongest, it just means that he's the most reliable. The comparison between Gigan and King Ghidorah is like a hammer and anvil, with King Ghidorah himself himself literally being described as physically the most powerful monster in the universe. So strong to the point the Vortech are actually hesitant to use him because it's hard to keep control of him. Curiously, it describes that he's able to withstand damage from all known forms of attack, even though this particular King Ghidorah does have a weakness against poison attacks. Though to be fair, poison isn't exactly a very common type of attack in these games. I do kind of question if these same damage stats still factor in these games, especially because the monsters have different attacks for the most part compared to their previous two game versions. They recycle the same stats from Save the Earth, but like I said before, some of the monsters don't really have the same moves they did in those versions to begin with. Kiryu is described as the GDF's most successful defender and their first and best option for defending humanity, which makes you think that Kiryu should be the strongest GDF monster, right? Well, then there's Mecha King Ghidorah, who finally has an official backstory, being the GDF's best attempt at using the weapons of the Vortech to defend her, basically being a King Ghidorah from another timeline. While it doesn't specify who did this to Mecha King Ghidorah, we can all make a fairly good guess at who it was. The manual mentions Mecha King Ghidorah retaining most of King Ghidorah's combat techniques, not necessarily meaning raw power, but if we go by the stats, he is just a little bit underwhelming compared to original King Ghidorah. It also mentions that he might stand as humanity's best hope against the Vortech invasion, so he's held in the same regard as Kiryu, but which one's better? There's also Mechagodzilla 2, or Heisei Mechagodzilla, which is described as being reverse engineered from the Vortex Mechagodzilla. But wait, this is the same exact Mechagodzilla that appears as the final boss on the Vortex side at the end of Destroy All Monsters Melee. The Vortex Mechagodzilla in question resembles his Showa design. It seems like the game's basically retconning the appearance of Mechagodzilla to say that this Showa Mechagodzilla is actually the one you fight at the end of Destroy All Monsters Melee, and that the Heisei design is now being retconned to be the GDF creation instead. I'm guessing because of his appearance as the final boss if you play as Godzilla 90s and Save the Earth, Mechagodzilla 2 is still meant to be the evil Showa incarnation controlled by the Vortech. He's very similar to the Vortech Mechagodzilla, whose entry confirms that yes, this is meant to be the one that you fought at the end of Destroy All Monsters Melee. What's interesting is that it describes Mechagodzilla as being too well armored for any of the Earth monsters to defeat single-handedly. Now that's very interesting, because that means that canonically this monster was not beaten at the end of Destroy All Monsters Melee one-on-one, including against Godzilla. This means that canonically Godzilla had to team up with one other monster in order to beat him at the end of Destroy All Monsters Melee. So you beating Mechagodzilla one-on-one is not canon, apparently. I wonder how that worked, because the aliens teleported the player-controlled monster to their mothership, which means the other monster that had to help the player monster out, most likely Godzilla, had to somehow get there as well. Seeing as how Anguirus' entry describes him as being at Godzilla's side to the bitter end, and the fact that we see the two monsters walking together in the intro for adventure mode in Destroy All Monsters Melee, leads me to likely believe that it was these two monsters together that ultimately stopped Mechagodzilla. Too bad that there's no co-op in that game allowing you to actually play it out. To no one's surprise, Mogira is kind of rated as the weakest of the GDF monsters, and this isn't surprising when you consider he's really only good for hit-and-run tactics with his energy weapons, with the manual literally describing him as being too physically frail and only being relegated to long-range support. With that being said, here's my total rankings for all the playable monsters based off their given stats when you select them. Rodan's at the bottom because he's got terrible physical stats pretty much in every category, with his only excelling feat being in speed, which as I've mentioned before is probably the least important stat in these games, since it only affects movement speed and nothing else. I also chose to rank the monsters based off what kind of attacks they inflict, as a lot of these monsters seem to be weaker against certain types of attacks more than others. Like for example, quite a few monsters are all weak against electricity, so a monster that can dish out electricity is going to have an advantage in most cases. Similarly, monsters that have quite a few weaknesses, or common weaknesses, are also going to be hurt in their standing in the list as well. Godzilla's around the middle, which I think makes sense given that he has the most balanced stats for beginners to the game. He only has one weakness, and isn't really lacking in any of the 4 stat categories. I do put Godzilla 90s and 54 Godzilla above him, simply because I just think that having a better weapon stat is more important than speed, as you are going to be dealing energy damage half the time in the fights anyway, with 54 Godzilla having the best of both worlds, at the cost of being slightly slower than the two, which as I've mentioned in the part 1 videos, speed really doesn't make that much of a difference if the stats are relatively close to whoever you're fighting. Biollante places pretty high on this list because even though she has the slowest speed stat compared to most monsters, her range with her Vine Tentacle attacks makes up for that. Who needs to move fast when your attacks can strike several hundred meters away? She can use ranged attacks without even using using her energy meter. Obsidious is weird. Even though in the PS2 version he's literally just a carbon copy of Orga right down to the same moveset and attacks, his stats are a bit weird. See, in the Wii version, the stats that you read on screen when you select him are actually wrong. According to Toho Kingdom, these stats are what are actually for Obsidious in the Wii version. But to make matters more confusing, he actually has different stats in the PS2 version, which are significantly better than the Wii version. Obsidious literally goes from just being near the bottom to being near the top, and it's all dependent on which version of the game you're playing. King Ghidorah is, of course, at number 1. Not only does he have the highest total number of stats added up, but also he dishes out the type of damage that a lot of monsters are weak against, and his only weakness being a damage type that is very uncommon, with the only monsters capable of inflicting it having quite a few weaknesses themselves. This is the monster rankings based off sheer gameplay and stats. Now, if we take into account the lore stated about them, here is how much it changes. Again, Mothra and Batra are basically the same as each other, so of course they rank around the same. I feel like the final bosses of each of the games should also be automatically high up as well. Orga's technically not the final boss of Save the Earth if you're actually playing on hard mode, so he kind of gets a pass for being low as a final boss. Space Godzilla is definitely more challenging in Unleashed, just simply because of his unique boss abilities that he has, like being able to erect like a bunch of crystals around him that can do quite a lot of damage very quickly until you take them out. Destroya, of course, with his broken laser katana, as well as his overall high stats, already put him just under the top 5. Even though King Ghidorah is stated to be physically the strongest monster, Godzilla has canonically beaten him at least twice in the first 2 games, as you have to fight him on your way to fighting Mechagodzilla in Destroy All Monsters Melee, and you always fight him when playing as Godzilla 2000 in hard mode. Yet, despite this, Mechagodzilla was too much for Godzilla to fight one-on-one, proving that power isn't everything. And yeah, for those who've actually played Destroy All Monsters Melee, fighting Mechagodzilla at the end of the game is pretty hard, even on easy difficulty. Space Godzilla is literally the final boss of both Save the Earth and Unleashed, and one thing I forgot to mention earlier, Space Godzilla, curiously, is the only monster without an entry in the manual. However, some old IGN articles that are still active on their website, before Godzilla Unleashed came out, actually had articles hyping up some of the monsters that would be in the game. This is significant because one of them is Space Godzilla, and it actually includes a brief backstory for this particular Space Godzilla, mentioning that prior to the events of Unleashed, he has attacked Earth twice, once on his own, and then once with the Vortex. This pretty much shuts down my theory that Space Godzilla was the ultimate monster the Vortex were trying to create with the G-cells and save the Earth. I mean, you could argue that, again, canonically, Space Godzilla should be a lot stronger in Unleashed, because it literally took the combined might of 3 of the monster factions in order to beat Space Godzilla, even though, let's be honest, you were doing like 90% of the work actually fighting Space Godzilla. And of course, Godzilla should place at the top, because he did beat Space Godzilla 1-on-1 at the end of Save the Earth. And if that wasn't enough, then Godzilla going into his Tyrant form just makes him more OP, especially if you combine the crystal surges with that. I mean, I guess you could maybe throw in the Atragon, Hedorah, and Ebirah. I'm not going to bother to include the versions of the monsters that only pop up in the Wii version. And yes, Mothra and Batra, even in their larva forms, are still generally better than Rodan. Again, all Rodan's got going for him is speed. While there is some early cancelled build of a version of Ebirah you'd be able to fight on land and save the Earth, he doesn't seem to really have that many moves. And obviously he isn't meant to be a playable monster, so he'd have very limited attack potential. I'd argue the Atragon would still be above Ebirah, just simply because of its sheer speed and ducking in and out of combat, and the fact that it can fire freeze missiles to freeze you solid, or at least it seems to really love doing that in the PS2 version. Crystalak, curiously, was apparently spawned from the meteor shower that brought the crystals to Earth. So does that make Crystalak Space Godzilla's son? And while we're on that subject, the crystals also indirectly helped create Obsidious as well. Man, the Godzilla family tree in this timeline must look really whack. But in conclusion, this Godzilla is quite respectable among the other Godzillas in terms of how definitely top 10 with what we covered so far. And the crystal surges he keeps in between levels. You can only use them once per fight, but the fact that he's able to use them again in the next fight is quite considerable. It is a shame that he only obtains this much power getting the bad ending. Also, kind of a missed opportunity to have yourself fight a Tyrant form Space Godzilla as the final boss, when we got a little taste of that with King Ghidorah and the one optional